if he's able to come on. And Jake had a discussion with Pajot. I've not watched this full. I watched a little bit of it.
But I can't help myself but ask you about religion and what's behind your religious belief. Can we go there? How do you know that the Bible was divinely inspired and not just written by humans and made up? How do you know it's not made up stories?
What do you mean? No, what do you mean? Like, I'm not sure what you totally mean by made up stories. So let me say it clearly. What I mean is that there is a manner to which we care about made up stories to a certain level, but that level has a limit. There's a limit to the extent to which we care about made up stories. We tend to care about stories that consolidate our identity, that consolidate our place in the world. Those stories are not made up. They are transmitted. And in their transmission, it is possible that they change, but they're not someone who one day sat down and made up a story. They are a memory that gets contracted over time, right? So it's like the memory gets contracted for reasons that we could talk about. But the idea that this is someone who sat down and made up these stories, it's like, you know, that's true of Star Wars, but Star Wars does not found civilizations.
So let me try to come at this question a different way. I don't know if I'm probably doing a poor job articulating it. So another way for me to kind of approach it is, how do you know Jesus Christ was a divine person that was killed and resurrected? Like whether, or the talk, like my question is really, how do you know that the supernatural things described in the Bible happened? And I would imagine that your response, I don't want to speak for you, but I would imagine your response is something along the lines of, you know, if we accept the premise that the Bible is divine, then that as a premise absolutely justify, you know, that can explain how something supernatural can happen. But let me not answer the question for you. So how do you know these supernatural things, or whether we're talking about the resurrection, you know, you name it, how do you know that happened if it's supernatural?
So the first thing to say is that the purpose of telling a story of a miracle is not to prove that it happened. It's a very important aspect because it's like the modern materialist and the modern secularist has completely forgotten the reason why we remember things and the reason why we say things. You know, it's like the reason why we recount miracles is because of what they mean and also because of what they afford.
But in terms of, did they
happened? Like, and the way they're described is the best way you could describe them for us to care about them and remember them.
So my question is, how do you know they happened?
How do you know that anything happened before your life?
Here's
how do you know that anything happened outside of your own experience?
Well, yeah. So we have an accepted tradition of
we have an accepted tradition. Just repeat after you because it's the same.
Yeah, we have sure. So
you trust certain authorities to consolidate reality for you.
Hold on. We have a certain threshold for evidence, and if we find a fossil of a dinosaur and then another fossil, we put them together and we say we think dinosaurs existed. And so I'm not a scientist, but the scientific process dictates that if you meet a certain threshold of evidence and that evidence has like hard defined criteria, then we know that dinosaurs existed, that the earth is round, that Christopher Columbus, all these things. And so that's the answer to your question of how do we know something existed before the lifetime? There's a threshold of evidence with the parameters set by the scientific method. And if that threshold is met, that's how we form scientific conclusions. And if you say to me, hey, I think 500 years ago, human beings had wings and could fly, I would say, you know, show me the evidence. And if and maybe you could show me evidence, like maybe there's some drawing somewhere, but unless that evidence met the threshold prescribed by the scientific method, I would say it falls short. I don't buy it. I don't believe you that people could fly. Do you believe that the way we ascertain truth about the paths, it has to do with a certain threshold of evidence?
No, I think that's bullshit. I think it's what you said is absolute nonsense. It's actually not how you ascertain truth. So how do you know that the people who are presenting that evidence to you aren't lying, Jake? Have you seen the evidence yourself? Let me ask you that. Have you seen the evidence yourself?
Yeah, sure.
Did you hold the archaeological piece in your hand? Did you read the ancient manuscript?
No, but
you trust them, right? You trust them?
But I could. Well,
you trust them.
Yeah.
Well, that's the answer, man. The answer is trust. That's how it works. it actually is held in trust. And so we have witnesses of things happening in the first century, witnesses that we trust, that I trust, and I trust those witnesses, and therefore I believe that it happened. So we have multiple witnesses that have experienced something, and I trust that it happened. And I trust that it happened not because of the witnesses, but because of what it affords me. Because you're confusing things together. You're confusing a raw like evaluation of a fact or an event, and something which is not only a fact or an event, like, did you drop your pencil on the ground today? And then I could have filmed it or whatever. But we're talking about something which is civilization affording, which is world affording, which basically is at the origin of an entire world. So let me ask you another a question that's related to this, which is that, so for, let's say around 1,000 years, at least 1,000 years, right? Everybody in Europe believes certain things to have happened, right? And then at some point, someone started to try to disprove that they happened. What is their motivation?
To pursue truth, and if they find new information that proves it wrong, that they want to pursue the truth and what's real.
And how could you do that about something that was witnessed by 12 people 2,000 years ago?
If you find evidence that so for example, if 12 people 2,000 years ago said, "Hey, we saw, a person flying with angel wings," and then you're able to somehow disprove it, but it's hard to disprove that. I mean, people say a lot of crazy things, and so that's why the threshold for whether something is true is not whether 12 people said it; it's whether there's evidence.
But that's not how you live. That's such a lie. You're giving yourself illusion of the way that you exist. So how can you prove that your wife loves you?
But
how can you prove that? Like,
no, I can't.
You can't prove the things that the world that you live in is not based. Your world that you live in is based on trust, Jake. It is not based on facts.
But they absolutely. Can you hear me?
Yeah. What's up, man? How you doing?
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Sure. How you doing? How was your Pajot talk?
I thought it was fun. I don't know. You tell me. I mean, I've gotten different responses. It was cool. A little unfulfilling. But
I haven't. I only saw a little bit of like a couple clips because we just got back from like a 2-week road trip, so I haven't seen much of it.
So Twitter Spaces is audio only, right? I don't get to. I just got my camera set up. Okay.
You're on my channel, so you can clip this and do whatever.
Okay. Is this being recorded or?
Yeah, we're live on YouTube and over here on Twitter.
Man, I'm pretty clueless. So. Okay. I reached out to you, Jay, because I had it had to be like 50, 60 something, like a lot of people saying, "Hey, you got to talk to Jay Dyer."
Okay.
And so, because my conversation with Jonathan Pajot, the purpose of that conversation, the reason I set up the call, the reason he spoke to me, is because I wanted to ask him questions about the work he does with symbolism. That's his thing. And then we get into the call. And he mentions Christianity, and I couldn't help myself. And I was like, do you really believe in that? Can I ask you about your views? Can I push you on this a bit? And I said, Jonathan, I know this is not something that we said we would discuss, but here we are. Like, can I go into this? And he said, yeah, go for it, for sure. And so that's how we got into that conversation.
And you, what? I haven't had a chance to look at your channel. What do you focus on mainly? What's your topics?
Yeah, so basically the question I asked him that I want to ask you is, I agree with you that there's a lot of value to be gained in practicing religion. I think we live in a world where it's difficult to create a system of morality and ethics outside of religion, and there's a lot of value to religion, okay? I think people should practice what they want to practice. That being said, I still think it's appropriate to say, well, hold on a minute, did the stories of the Bible actually happen? But again, I want to make it extremely clear to the listeners. I'm not saying this is so silly, you shouldn't practice religion. I'm saying there's value to religion, and it's a good question to ask, how do you know the stories happened? And I think you can be someone who practices religion or appreciates religion but doesn't believe in the Bible word for word. So really my question is just, how do you know that the Bible, like the stories of the Bible, actually happened? Mm-hmm. That's my question.
Yeah, it's a fair question. I tend to argue the transcendental argument for God's existence, and so it's kind of like it's a logical argument that's prior to logic at all, or the doing of logic, or any knowledge claims at all, because it deals with the preconditions of knowledge. So it's kind of like, I would agree with you that we're not going to settle the issue of like what things are possible or not possible apart from what types of things we think are possible within our worldviews or our paradigms. So ultimately for me, it's kind of a worldview question where we end up saying, well, the only way that I know what's possible is based on some kind of metaphysical assumption from the outset. And in order to go about that, we end up having to do worldview or transcendental argumentation. So that's kind of debating things at a fundamental level. And the challenge is this, that if the Christian God does not exist, then knowledge, metaphysics, and ethics becomes impossible to justify or make sense of. So I usually flip this argument and say that the way that I know is that without that God existing, knowledge in terms of justified true belief wouldn't really even be possible. And so God becomes, for me, in my argument, the necessary grounding for the possibility of knowledge, logic, ethics at all. That's the transcendental argument, and I think it's the strongest one.
By the way, I want to. The other thing, like I feel like I could have done better in my conversation with Jonathan Peugeot is like I want to concede to as many points as I possibly can, because that way I don't detract. I really have one singular point, and I don't want it to get lost. And I feel like with religious debate and conversation, the arguments often get tangled up because there's so many layers of understanding that we can get to with these conversations. So let me concede as much as I can. You're making, so God exists, right? I have no problem with that. Why not? So God is, let's say God is real, and and that explains, I think, whatever you were saying about like the ethics or something. So again, let me ask the question: how do you know that the stories of the Bible actually happened?
Because of the transcendental argument. That's where I start from.
So I don't know if I followed the argument, but I think what your argument is saying is like because of some things that we see in the world, like I don't know, like patterns or something, that therefore the Bible. I'm not following. Like, what's the argument?
So the form of the argument is X is the necessary condition of Y therefore X. The argument in terms of how I explicate it is that if God didn't exist, then there would be no way to have justified true belief. That is, a way to ground our knowledge in terms of epistemology. And so because we do have knowledge, or we appear to, exchange information and have conversations, and we use language and meaning and numbers and math and all that, then knowledge appears to exist. And so therefore, in order for knowledge to even be possible, requires some kind of ultimate absolute, some kind of ultimate principle, and namely that is the Christian God. So the Christian God does the work of grounding as a kind of, in theology is called divine conceptualism. So meaning, language, all these things are only possible in the sense of justifying their existence and their.
Jay, maybe I'm fucking stupid. I'm not understanding this at all, man. Let me try to read it back to you, and then you. So the essence of what you're saying is like, look, you're not trying to prove the Bible stories being true from first principles, saying, hey, Jake, look, here's the evidence, here's how I know it's true. What you're doing is the reverse, which I think is a reasonable approach to take, right? To say, like, I want to think of an analogy. Like, if I can't prove something, like if I find a dead person with a bullet hole in their head and I can't find the gun, I could infer like, hey, this person probably got shot in the head because now there's a bullet hole in their head, right? So it's possible for us to infer causal relationships.
No,
in the reverse.
Sorry. So I don't fault you for.
But I really like I don't know if it's because I haven't slept enough. Like, so you're saying, can you say your argument in like one sentence? Like, so you think that the essence of what you're saying is you think the stories of the Bible happened because of some way that they're manifesting themselves in reality. I'm just not clear what you're really saying. Like,
yeah, I mean, Right. So again, it's a specific type of logical argument called the transcendental argument for God's existence, right?
Yes.
And it posits that before you can even do the type of questioning that you're asking about what's possible in terms of miracles or Bible stories or whatever, that there are prior questions that we all have and assumptions about what's possible that have to be debated and discussed first. So in your worldview, you would, as a skeptic or an atheist or whatever your position is, agnostic, you would assume that, it just doesn't seem like those things are possible. So at the outset, you and I have different accounts of what things are and aren't possible, metaphysically speaking. So the point there is just to say that...
I don't think we do at all. If I told you, hey man, like my grandma rose from the dead today, you'd be like, nah, man, no, she didn't. Like, let me see evidence of that. I would bet that you and I, Jay, have the same understanding of what generally is metaphysically possible.
Well, no, but because my ultimate governing commitment is the Christian paradigm, yours is not. So no, we have fundamentally different accounts of what things are and are not possible.
Would you believe me if I told you right now my grandmother rose from the dead today?
No, I would not.
Why not?
Because it's very unlikely.
Right, because why? Because it violates what you know about physics, right?
No, it's just it wouldn't be likely just given a common sense account of what things typically occur. But
exactly. So you take your words. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you.
So the whole argument, I think you've missed the entire argument. The argument is not settled by particular claims about this or that event in our lives. It's a question of paradigms as a whole. And you're reading everything, all of the evidence that comes into your brain or whatever is read through your worldview, through your paradigm. And so you say your assumption is that certain things are not possible or very, very unlikely. But that has nothing to do with whether or not you can give an account for these things as a whole. So do you believe that there's objective truth or that knowledge is possible?
I don't. You'd have to define those terms. And by the way, I don't want to. I'm not trying to. I don't want to like outright try to refute what you're saying or try to kind of push you to a corner. I really am genuinely trying to understand.
Right. So I mean, we've heard skeptical claims a lot, and I don't have a problem with you bringing forward sort of the skeptical claim or the argument, but the point is that this is a much deeper issue than whether or not it's possible for something out of the ordinary to happen. So let's say that your grandmother did appear to, come back or wake up out of the coffin or something like that. I mean, you would probably assume that even if that occurred, it wasn't a miracle. It was some sort of weird phenomenon that we haven't studied or understood yet, or science hasn't given us an answer yet, right? So even if someone rose from the dead, it wouldn't necessarily mean that the supernatural is true, even in your worldview, right?
No, I mean, if someone rose from the dead, I would be a believer, man. I would say, wow, that's pretty good evidence that something's going on here. I would, in that instant, I would try to find a religious.
Well, don't you think that? So there's a lot of claims of this in the world, right? And most skeptics.
Is my mic okay? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear.
It's good because I got this Shure microphone. I don't know if it's coming. The audio on Twitter Spaces doesn't really give me an option to.
You sound great to me. So.
Do I?
You sound great, yeah.
Oh, thanks, man. You should see. Okay. So anyway, so you were saying.
No, I mean, there are miracle claims all the time in the world, and most people do not accept them. They most of the time they will say, well, there's probably another explanation for that. And you don't think in the case of your grandmother you would look for another explanation?
Yeah, so if I saw it, then I would say, wow, that's pretty remarkable. If I told you my grandmother rose from the dead, hopefully you would not believe me. You would say, dude, I don't believe you. That sounds pretty unlikely.
Well, that's precisely why this issue can't be solved on what people's claims are, and it's a
exactly.
So that's why it goes to the paradigm level. That's the whole point of the transcendental argument.
So let's then, I was saying I don't understand the transcendental argument. Let's drill into the transcendental argument. So I'm going to say what I understand about it, and then maybe you can elaborate a bit, and we can have a substantive conversation about this argument itself. So the transcendental argument, as I understand from you, is that we understand the divinity of the Bible or of Christianity based on the causes of that source. So based on what we're seeing.
No, it's not the causal argument.
We're seeing in reality. So what So I guess let's just dig into that. So what is it about the world?
Right. So the transcendental argument is prior to the teleological argument. Is prior to the causal argument. It's before all of those because it's an argument about the possibility of arguing at all. So it's a meta level argument. Are you familiar with like meta level argumentation?
I just think it's. I guess.
Well, maybe you need to understand it first because I'm not trying to be rude, but like let's understand it first. So what is your worldview first, by the way? Agnostic?
What is my worldview? I don't know. You know what? I actually, on principle, I'm going to stay away from any of those terms because I don't think they're helpful in this context. In fact, I think they detract from the point. I think a big problem with these religious arguments is you have people like Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson who, because of their own ego primarily, are kind of rambling and trying to intertwine these complex terms. I'm going to use as simple terms as possible and as few words as possible to make my points because I think that is at the crux of a powerful argument. And I can very concisely describe how I understand reality without the use of any of these more complex theories, right? So what do I believe? I believe we live on planet Earth and it's round and it orbits the sun. I believe that we have an intact system for discerning truth about history.
And what would that be?
Yeah, so hold on. So I believe we have an intact system for discerning truth about, generally speaking, about science and history. And we sometimes get it wrong. Sometimes we fuck it up. And sometimes the details are wrong. But you and I both agree, I don't even have to ask this, you and I both agree that largely speaking, our global societal understanding of history is true, right? Neither you
No, I have no idea what that even means. That's just appeals to generalities that I don't even know what that means.
So I'll be very specific. Both you and I agree that claims of the fact that the Mayans had a thriving civilization, that there was a Roman Empire that rose and fell, that the Mongolian Empire, that Christopher Columbus sailed across the ocean, all of these are historical accounts that we have created as a society and understood. And I'm going to make the bet, and please tell me if I'm wrong, that you believe these things, that you believe George Washington was the first president, that you believe Christopher Columbus sailed across the ocean. Am I correct or am I incorrect?
Yeah, I don't have any significant reasons to doubt those things.
So let me respond to that. So the reason you're not doubting those things is because, like myself, you agree that through the methods that, as a society, as a world, we've discovered that the Egyptians had pyramids and the Mayans had a civilization and Christopher Columbus sailed across the ocean. We trust those things because we know that we have a great system for understanding historical fact. It's not a perfect system.
No,
pretty good.
Now we come to the problem here.
So do you or don't you? So here's the question: do you or don't you believe that we have a really good system?
No. So you're confusing. So it would help to take an epistemology class, not being a rude person by saying that, but you can assert the things that are commonly held, but that doesn't tell you that you have the right theory of epistemology or the right theory of knowledge. That's another type of question. So you're confusing the pragmatic account of what most of us believe or what we think by common sense, which is not necessarily wrong, but none of that can tell you whether you have the right theory of knowledge.
But I'm asking a very simple question. Do you believe?
No.
So like, I'll ask in 8 words.
You can ask that question, but it's ignoring what I'm raising, which is epistemology and your theory of knowledge. So you can't just keep appealing to to consensus, because at the level of epistemic theory, that's a fallacy.
Okay, so I'll grant all that. So here's my question, and it's a yes or no question. And do you, Jay Dyer, think that we meaning, America, society, the world, whatever, do we have a system for discerning historical truth that works? Do we have a system that works?
It works for certain things, but it can't tell you the right theory of epistemology. That's the point.
I feel like invoking these terms is
okay. So in other words, you don't want to go into philosophy because that would be the problem.
I want to go into philosophy, but I want you to answer my question. Do you think we have a system?
I am answering your question, but it's such a low tier type of question that you're not familiar with what epistemic theory is. Do you know what that is?
Yes.
What?
Do I know
what is it? What is your theory of epistemology?
Epistemology is.
Are you Googling it right now?
As the notion of truth in terms of epistemic notions.
Did you Google it to read it?
I Googled it because I don't.
Yeah. Right. So you're not even aware of what the issues are. The question was, what is your theory of knowledge? Not do people believe things through common sense and consensus. Do you understand that consensus is a fallacy?
Consensus is a fallacy. Sure. Yeah. That can be a fallacy if everyone just believes one thing.
Okay. So your epistemic theory was grounded on a fallacy because you said, well, what we know is what we all know, what America and the world has determined.
I'm asking you a question. Do you think that
That's a tu quoque.
What's that? I don't know what these are.
So you don't know what these... So why are you trying to debate these things if you don't know the basic fallacies?
And you're pushing back me by asking other questions. So
No, the question was about epistemology, and you're asking me another question, which is a tu quoque.
So I apologize if I ignored your question. So what... Your question that I heard was you're questioning me about whether...
I want to know your theory of knowledge because you said, we know. In fact, you said it twice. We know that this is the right approach to how we have knowledge of history. And I'm saying that is not adequate and doesn't work for grounding your epistemology. That's another type of question that you can't just appeal to consensus.
Yeah. So I don't know that... So let me try to answer your question, Jay.
Have you had a basic philosophy class? I'm not trying to be rude to you, but I can tell that you haven't.
I have.
You have, but you didn't know what epistemology was.
I don't know the definition as you're using.
Okay, but you would learn that if you had a philosophy class.
I had a degree in this. I just haven't. I just don't think it's relevant to the specific question.
Oh, so epistemology is not relevant to the question of debate. Okay.
No, sorry. So it's been a while. So the theory of knowledge. Okay. So now I remember what it is. Gotcha. So now I remember what I learned in undergrad about epistemology. I am with you. It's an ontology, and there's, all these terms. I just look, to be honest, I don't think.
Right. So you're going to go back to appealing to avoiding the question, right? You're going to go back to appealing to your basic question.
What's your question? Your question is, what is epistemology? Is that your question?
Wow. No. You said that we have a basic way for discerning truth, and we know, and we know. You said it twice. We know, right? And I said, how do you know that that's the right criteria for determining truth? That that's the right epistemic criteria?
How do I know? But I don't think you want to be asking that question. And the reason I don't think you want to be asking that question is because if that's a sincere question, then you're calling into question everything we know about reality.
You're not even aware of basic philosophy. So.
Okay.
So if you're going to have a debate, you need to know the basic terms. Socrates. Got to unmute. Unmute Socrates.
Okay. Hey, there we go. This is my first time on Twitter Spaces, so thanks for bringing me on. I'm actually Jake's friend. I was hoping to hop on to try to help bridge that. But yeah.
Okay. So what's the epistemic answer?
Yeah. So you were talking about the transcendental argument, which is that God is necessary to even have a foundation, to have some kind of truth or understanding. I've heard of that. I've never gone into that argument in detail. I understand.
Okay, and so what's the answer on epistemology?
So I'm not clear why you would need to have some kind of other entity.
No. Forget all of that. He said that he wanted to go with like a common sense approach to epistemology, and I said, how do we know that that's the right criteria of truth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wouldn't rest on like a common.
Okay, what would you rest
on? I would rest on. I mean, I guess it depends on how far you're trying to prove. If you're saying something like history, what happened in history, you could go with what's at the level that's verifiable. So
right, and so that's why ultimately, I was saying ultimately, it's not a question of historical claims; it's a question of worldviews.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, for me, so for me, it's conceivable. Like I can imagine a world in which there is no God, but also I can have knowledge.
Well, it doesn't really matter whether you can imagine that or not. What we need is an argument.
Well, if it's possible for that world to exist, then it's not necessary for God to exist.
I'm not sure that it is. I'm not sure that it is possible. So, what is your account of knowledge if God doesn't exist? Give me an account of knowledge.
like a formal account. I mean, I have like a I believe that I have memories. I believe that I have things that I believe to be true. I believe that I exist. There are things like, statements I can make.
Okay.
Like
are there moral absolutes at all? Can we know them?
I wouldn't say that I hold moral absolutes. I guess.
Okay. So are there any absolutes at all?
Are there any absolutes? I mean, I think there's things that are defined. So things like logic or arithmetic or parts of math that are defined that I think are simply true.
Okay, and on what basis do we believe that those things are simply true?
Given that they're defined. So if you have a definition,
anything undefined is true?
Anything sorry, say that again?
So just defining it makes it true? I'm asking what makes it true.
Well, it's something isn't X isn't true because X is defined.
Right. So you said it's defined. That's what my question was. Why does that make it true?
No. So within a system that's defined, you can have things that are true.
Okay. And is that the criteria of knowledge? Why would we accept that as our epistemic criteria?
As our epistemic criteria, I feel like there's some particular meaning that you have.
Yeah, like the criteria problem. Are you familiar with the criteria problem?
No, I'm not familiar with the criteria problem.
No, you're a philosophy man. You've got a philosopher as your profile picture here, and you're not familiar with David Chisholm or with Roderick Chisholm?
No, I've never heard that name.
Okay, well, it's called the criteria problem. So the question is, how do we have knowledge without presupposing a criteria of knowledge? And if we say that we have a criteria of knowledge, then we already assume that we have knowledge. So it's a classic problem in epistemology.
Okay. Can you give like a little bit of just a sense of what you mean by a criteria of knowledge? What would be a criteria of knowledge?
Yeah, what gives us the grounding for true versus false beliefs or propositions?
Right. Okay. So that's perfect. So let me clarify. What I'm about to explain isn't the only thing that I consider knowledge, but within a subset of things. Okay,
but the question, you're not understanding the question because it's prior to you just asserting these things. The question is how do we?
I think I'm answering
the question is how do we know that that's the case?
Well, you haven't heard what my answer was.
It's not going to matter what the answers are because you're not answering the criteria question. You're just stating a position.
Well, I'm giving a preamble to my answer to the criteria question. Do you know what the preamble or?
Is it going to tell us why we ought to believe it, or is it just more assertions?
It's the opposite of an assertion. It's giving you more of an explanation of my worldview, the degree to which what I'm about.
Okay, but is that telling us why we ought to believe it, or is that just an assertion?
It's not an assertion. No.
Okay, so why ought we believe it?
Why ought you believe something that isn't an assertion?
Your position. Why ought we believe your position? Stop playing games.
Well, would you like to know my position?
Yes.
Okay. So my position is that within a system that has definitions, there are things that can be true based on those definitions.
Okay. Assertion.
So if I have axiom 1 and axiom 2.
Okay. Assertions. Yeah. Where's the ought? Why ought we believe this is the case? You said you weren't going to just give me assertions. You said you were going to tell me why we ought to believe it.
Why ought you believe?
Okay, so take an epistemology course and stop trying to be a dork and sound like you know it all. So we have a skeptic who would like to discuss tag and epistemology with you. I'm going to let him talk to you if you're okay with that. I don't want to lose my temper because
Just give me 1 second.
Sure. He was in here earlier, so we're going to let Jake back in to have a discussion with you. That way he doesn't feel like he has to deal with me again. And I don't want to come off as mean because we all know that I'm mean. And I just got to quit being mean. But I don't have a whole lot of patience if we're dealing with people who don't want to address things that are pretty common in philosophy. So, Jake, if you want to have an interaction with Father Deacon Dr. Ananias, you're welcome to.
Hey, guys. Am I back on?
Sure.
Hey, thank you. Thanks for letting me back in. By the way, I didn't think you were being mean. I think we might have been talking past each other. I mean, I think I should have framed the question like this. Like, I have a particular question, and this question, in my view, doesn't require us to define and interrogate and kind of debate deeper philosophical definitions.
But our response is that it does.
Okay. So then I guess, so how about, so I guess I have been ineffective and I have failed at articulating my question in such a way that has gotten a response from you. So I want to try again. And again, my goal is just to get a response. So I want to grant you everything that you want to be granted. I want to accept the definitions as you have stated them for every philosophical term that you might have, and any claim of my own ignorance.
So I think that the impasse that we're having is that you think that the questions that I'm asking or the things that I'm saying to you aren't addressing what your challenge is. And my response is that the challenge is more fundamental than the question that you're asking.
The challenge is more fundamental.
Right.
My
challenge to you is more fundamental. My response is more fundamental than the level of discourse or dispute that you have about historical events and historical claims.
Right, and so then if I'm, and by the way, it's possible that the way I'm framing this question is just not acceptable. In which case, I tried and I can chalk up my losses. But I guess here's another question. Let's say you're going for a walk one day, and a 5-year-old walks up to you and he says, "Hey, you're Jay Dyer," and you're like, "Yeah." And the 5-year-old boy is like, "Hey, Jay Dyer, I have a question for you. Do we as a society have a way of ascertaining historical truth? Yes or no?" What would you say to that 5-year-old?
Again, if you restate this, it's ignoring the question that we're asking, which is that you're assuming a whole bunch of things that have not been demonstrated yet. Because the way that the question...
I'm a 5-year-old, I'm asking a question.
No, this doesn't work. Again, you don't understand why this doesn't work. But I mean, I'm not trying to be rude to you, but like, there's a reason why philosophy progresses in the direction that it does, and certain things happen the way that they do. It's not something that's divorced from life and reality.
Yeah.
And so
I'll do whatever it takes, man. I will do whatever it takes to get you to answer my question. Like, what do I have to do? What do I have to answer?
I'm not really even understanding.
How do I get you to answer
his question is, let me see if I restate it. The question is that if we have a reliable way to go about...
Do we have a reliable way? That's my question.
Again, you don't understand the question, the response. Because it's a paradigm level question, you can't just respond with the way that many people operate as if that addresses the paradigm level question. Does that make sense or no?
I'll answer really easy.
Be mean to me. Tell me what I need to do. I will do anything, man.
Well, I'll tell
whatever
you.
I need to do. Just answer my question. How do I get you? What can I say to get you to answer my question?
I'll
answer you more definitions? Like, what do I do?
I'll answer it.
Yeah.
People do have a reliable way. I argue this in my paper. At a first order, people can know things, and there's methodologies, there's normative principles. The difference is that person at the first order in an autonomous way doesn't know that. They don't know if that's reliable.
Okay.
So that's why it pushes up to a second order question is... Only orthodox paradigm can actually, from a privileged epistemic point of view, say, yeah, that's a reliable historical mode. That child can know that. That's correct. That person knows. So apart from the orthodox paradigm, people don't know that they have a reliable method. Does that make sense? So
Father Ananias, and by the way, I'd love to speak with you sometime. A lot of my viewers so I did this, what became a debate. It was an accidental impromptu debate with Jonathan Peugeot, during which I was very apologetic. I really didn't want to progress it, but we did, and I thought it was interesting. So a lot of my guests, my viewers of that debate wanted me to talk to both you, Jay Dyer, and you, Father Ananias. So if we can, I'm going to reach out to you. Hope we can connect. So, Father Ananias, my question is, do you, Father Ananias, believe that we as a society have an accurate or effective way for discerning or ascertaining historical truth?
Yes, I absolutely do believe.
Awesome. Great. Thank you. Okay, my next question is, given that you do believe that we as a society have a way of ascertaining historical truth, and by the way, one of the amazing products of that ability to discern truth is, history textbooks, okay? So here's my question to Father Ananias. Because you believe in the system that we have for ascertaining historical truth, which has resulted in products like history textbooks, my question to you is, why are the stories of the Bible not in history textbooks?
Why are they not in the history textbooks?
Yes, that's my question.
When do you think the first textbook was?
Do you really want to? So let me ask you. The first textbook was after a lot of history that's recorded in the textbooks, right? We were able.
The first textbook is after the history in the textbooks.
Oh, so, yeah, big time. Do you think that the Mayan civilization had history textbooks?
Dude, come on. I asked you a question. When were the first textbooks?
When were the first textbooks? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
So wait a minute. Your question is premised on that history textbooks should and ought to have the biblical stories in them if they're going to be reliable. But you don't know when the first textbooks were written.
It depends what you mean by textbook. So
what do you mean by textbook? This is your argument, dude.
You have a really interesting way of
Okay, here we go. So you have a low tier. You have it's like a kindergarten level epistemology, and when we reply with the nuance that's necessary for these questions, you act like we're short.
Question. I'm saying I don't know, and you're saying then your argument's bullshit.
Well, I'll respond.
Well, you ought to know if that's what your argument's based on.
By the way,
it's not. It isn't. It's irrelevant when the first history textbook.
Okay, so we ought to go by history textbooks. Who cares when they and where they come from? Why don't they have the Bible?
The first history textbook was in 1482. There's your
Did you just Google that? Like you Googled it earlier?
This isn't.
So you debate with Google.
I don't understand what this has to do with the reliability of the scriptures, which themselves are historical accounts. I could answer, be like, I don't know. I could speculate, and I could give you answers. Why aren't they recorded in history books? But it has nothing.
This has nothing to do with whether it's true or false. Exactly.
Whether it's true or false or reliable.
I'm asking why is it on the history textbook? That's what I'm asking.
But that's irrelevant to whether it's true or false. So again, you don't.
Actually, I'm not going to answer it. I can't, and I'm not going to, because I think it's going to drive you to a more important point. I'll say I don't know. How about that?
I don't know this. I want to get into Father Ananias, and
There's lots of things we don't know, but do you see how that then leads to that question? But it's irrelevant whether that's a reliable method.
But you already agreed it's a reliable method because I asked you, do you believe we have a method?
Yeah, but we want to know.
Yeah, because of the historical text.
Yeah, right? We want to know though, like why you think it's a reliable method, because your argument is assuming that, right?
Well, Father Ananias already said it is. So
no. I want to know why you think it is.
And you do too, by the way.
I want to know why you think it is.
For the same reasons that you do. That's why I do.
No, my reasons are ultimately theistic. I want to know why you think that's a reliable method. What's the criteria that we're supposed to go by here?
So the criteria, and this is a longer, more complicated answer, but the bigger point is that we have two options, all of us on this call. We either believe that, the earth is round, that science is real, and that the Roman Empire
appeals to irrelevance. That's had nothing to do with
it. I can tell you the system of methods that were used to determine, for example, that the Roman Empire existed.
So let's go back to the point that we had when you were first on, which is that you don't understand the question that's being asked to you when you posit that. So you assert that as your method and your criteria, and then I ask you why we ought to think that that's the correct criteria, and you had, and the last time that you came on. The last time you came on, you didn't want to answer that. You had to look it up.
I'm the guest. I'm the one asking the question.
No, it doesn't work like that. No, it's a debate. A debate's back and forth. So you don't get to set the parameters.
Jay, if I ask a question and you defer it by saying, well, when were the history books written? And that's not part of my argument. And then I tell you...
It is. Your argument assumes that we're supposed to somehow know that historical books are reliable, and you couldn't even tell me when history textbooks go. Like, why are we supposed to follow a textbook?
You're asking anecdotal questions.
They're not anecdotal. They're based on your... I'm questioning your assumptions, which you haven't questioned. That's what epistemology does.
So first of all, I gave you the answer, 1482.
No, you didn't.
It's totally irrelevant.
You don't understand. Do you understand what an arbitrary ad hoc argument is? The fact that something.
That's what you're making continuously.
I'm making it. So asking you questions is arbitrary and ad hoc.
Yes, correct. Asking a question about the date of a history textbook when it's irrelevant to the point I'm making is an ad hoc. You're deviating from the point. It's a form of hubris, frankly. Father Ananias was able to answer it. And to answer your question, the way
we just simply said that it's all irrelevant. And I'm only bringing up the history of when they started as to point out that if history textbooks.
I answered your question.
If history textbooks come from the 1400s, why would we expect that they would record things that are 6,000 years old?
Because they did. They recorded things like the Mayan civilization and the Roman Empire, which were years and years old.
Again, but none of this has anything to do with whether it's true or false. That's the stupidity of this whole debate, is that you don't understand the epistemic issue.
Father Ananias already said that he agrees we have an accepted method.
But that doesn't tell us about what we ought to believe. So the fact that people...
with him, because he disagrees with
I don't care what... Listen, the fact that...
I don't disagree. Jay's right on this.
Yeah, the fact that people agree...
You have no justification for what's an accepted method. We do, and this is why it goes into a presuppositional and transcendental argument for the existence of God, which in part is part of the grounding that we know that these are historically accurate, because the impossibility of the contrary to establish outside the worldview of orthodoxy in the scriptures on the entirety to make any claims whatsoever. So I can say it because orthodoxy provides the only epistemically privileged position. Nobody else can do that. So you can't arbitrarily come in and be like, well, I don't accept this, and I don't. Those are all knowledge claims.
You don't understand the difference between first order and second order claims either, which is the whole point of why we're having to go over this again and again.
Yeah, look, I think I'm going to get muted soon, so I don't want to dictate.
Look, all you have to look. Just tell me. So you've made a bunch of arguments about why we ought to follow the historical method that you're talking about. Why ought we do that? What's your epistemic criteria for that?
Epistemic, but here we go again. Like, this is.
So you don't like normal philosophy terms. Do you understand? If you're going to go debate people publicly, maybe you should know what these words mean. Why wouldn't you do that?
If you're making knowledge claims, you're in the category of epistemology. So you can't just say, well, I don't like this and I don't want to do it.
I'm making, but I actually think that you're subverting my question.
So you can't tell me why I ought to believe your position.
I can tell you why I ought to believe my position. So, by the way, for those listening...
No, don't change it. Tell me why we ought to believe your position.
Okay, so let me express what my position is, because I don't think it's clear.
No, we don't. We've heard it 5 times, dude. Why ought we believe your historical account? Your historical method.
Because every single person, including yourself, believes that we have a way of ascertaining historical truth.
That's just why, so that doesn't tell me that I ought to believe it. Even if everybody in the world does accept it, that doesn't tell me that I ought to believe it. That's a fallacy.
I'm making a point about ought to. I'm making a point about how do we live our lives. What's the
none of those. Those are all non sequiturs. The fact. I mean, that's relativistic.
Fine. You want data? Historical records. 5 things: historical records, archaeological evidence, coinage, literature, and
those are all assertions of facts, and I asked why we ought to believe that method.
Because it has been proven time and again to be
proven by who?
Stand the test of time.
That's a circle.
So
you're melting down because you haven't understood basic epistemic questions. Do you understand? Do you understand that I would help you? You would be a better debater if you understood basic epistemic questions, and you're melting down because you don't even understand it. You're just floundering.
You're not responding to my
What's
question.
the is-ought distinction?
You're debating yourself.
What's the is-ought distinction?
You're not debating me. You're debating yourself. I'm asking a question. You're not answering
What's the is-ought distinction?
Again, you're debating.
So you don't know basic philosophy. You said you had a philosophy class.
But you are bringing my question into your
No.
paradigm.
Again, no, we're not. I'm asking your account of why I ought to believe it, and you haven't given me a good argument.
By the way, this is a patronizing way of talking.
Oh, here we go. Now here comes the ad hominems and the complaints and the whining. You're not a victim. You came on here to debate. Tell me why I ought to believe your position. What's the difference between is ought?
So is what is in reality. Ought
Right.
is more of a statement about what we should do.
Okay, why ought I believe your position? Correct.
Why ought you should believe my position? There's many reasons. We have found that using historical records, archaeological evidence...
We have found. Who? That's a universal claim. That's just an assertion.
Every historian...
Every historian. Universal claim. Are you serious? Or are you trolling? Come on.
No, it's a fact.
It's a fact. So I can just assert. Do you understand in a debate how bad that is? What you just said, how dumb that is?
It's a fact. Like, I don't know what else to say.
Okay, so you can just assert things in a debate as facts and universal claims.
It is a fact. It's a fact. Like, there are certain claims that are facts, man. I don't know what to tell you.
Your claim wasn't even a fact. It's dumb. You said all historians assert your position.
No. I'm telling you facts. Like, I don't know what else to say.
You just melted down. The whole chat's laughing at you, dude. You realize that?
Wait, let them laugh at me. It's a fact.
All right, you're a troll. This is ridiculous.
Then mute me and don't.
Goodbye. Gladly. We now know that all the facts of all the historians assert my positions everywhere in the world. They say what I say, and it's just a fact. It is the case that it's a fact, and I know that because it's a fact. Literally, T-Jump. Like, actually, T-Jump's better than that guy. I will give T-Jump better.
Well, it's the same thing over and over again that somebody tells us a story, and they attach the words facts, proven, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, you just say it's a fact. You just say it's a fact.
We're not asking what you believe is a fact. We're asking the justification for that. So that why ought we to believe that?
Yeah,
so
but we all believe this.
Justification would have normative.
This is so stupid.
Would be binding upon us. Yeah, I ought to believe
that. That guy's a liar, too. He says that he's studied philosophy. He's had philosophy classes. Every single basic... I'm not being mean, but I don't think that it's not appropriate to lie and present yourself publicly as something that you're not. And if you claim that you're a philosopher, you've studied philosophy and had philosophy classes, as he claimed when he was first on, and you don't know any of the basic terms that come up in philosophy, people think that we're being mean, I'm being mean to people. No, you're being a fraud because you're presenting yourself as a philosopher and a student of these. He said he'd had classes on these things. No, he hadn't. He didn't know one single philosophical term that we mentioned in that whole time. So I don't think he's had any philosophy classes. And people love to get on and just present themselves as something that they're not. He says, I need to debate you because I debated Pajot. And this guy's just wanting attention. He's wanting to build up his channel. He invited Pajot on and then starts a debate with Pajot and acts like he didn't want to have a debate, but it happened. He says, you need to debate me in the DMs. We need to have this debate. Well, I said, you can come on a live stream. I'm not putting you up as a formal debate opponent when you have about 300 subscribers. No, I'm sorry. I don't owe you these things. And so when he comes on claiming that he's studied philosophy, he's had this training, and then he hasn't had any at all, that's fraudulent. Yeah, somebody said he got a University of Phoenix philosophy degree. So again, I'm not even, Father Deacon is way more studied in epistemology than me. But I've had enough philosophy to immediately tell when somebody's lying. And it only works really for low tier people. Like, that's the only way that the T-Jump can get an audience, is by a bunch of low tier Reddit people who are duped into his constant appeals to really simple, common sense things. Look, all I'm asking for is a simple answer to a question. Look, if you wouldn't believe that my grandmother rose from the dead, why should I believe Jesus rose from the dead? And then when we point out that these are ultimately paradigm level questions, no, I don't want to go to all that. Don't give me all that. Well, what's epistemology? And then you guys heard him Googling it. And he said, I'm Googling it. Okay, anybody who's had philosophy classes would at least know what that term is. Okay, it's not being mean. It's pointing out when people are being frauds and presenting themselves as something that they're not.
By the way, notice too, because I remember when we were in dialogue, we'd get tons of skeptics come into Russ Mannion's thing, and these issues about historicity of scripture would constantly come up. And notice he was saying, well, these things were recorded by the Aztecs or something like that. Well, they were recorded in scripture. Well, no, those don't count. Now you need extra stuff, right? And so that's why it moved it to the question of the second order. Well, who determines you need now extra stuff? First of all, you're not even being consistent because nothing would pass.
Yeah, it's just arbitrary.
Yeah. Oh, the Christians don't count as eyewitness because they're Christians. You have to have this atheist or, well, if they were witnesses and recorded, they would have been Christian if they saw the resurrection. So it's just all these arbitrary qualifications of what counts as something historically reliable.
I mean, we literally heard him Google and look up what epistemology was and read it out loud. And I said, "Are you Googling it?" And he said, "Yeah, I'm Googling it." I said, "But you said you've had philosophy classes." "Yeah, I have." "But you don't know what the word epistemology means?" I mean, come on, dude.